Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Motherland, Fort Salem. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Abigail's side of things. She actually kind of went home just because she wanted her in the deal to get Charvel's blood. I guess they needed to use that to potentially track down the people responsible. I mean, I guess it has something to do with, like, cause I don't know, they didn't really go into specifics about how that will help them find the people. Like, maybe they're going to use it as a trap or something. I don't know. Because I was about to say, like, the people who actually killed Charvel are all dead. But it's still like, right, the Camarilla still as a whole are out there, so I guess that's, like, your target's wide range. Because I was like, right, because they ended up killing themselves rather than being captured by you last season. So we'll see how that plays out. But granted, it's not the smooth operation they thought would be, because the only person that was supposed to be there was Abby's grandma, but it turns out everyone's gathered because her mom is trying to narrow down that whole, like, oh, you need to pick someone to settle down with and have a kid with. And we also meet her three dads, which I'm like, is this the first time ever hearing about that? I think it is, because Adil is supposed to be our introduction to that. Apparently, like, kind of like the high Atlantic, more high society side of which is, it seems like this is kind of a normal thing to even, like, three is just kind of like the normal. Like, I think probably even having more. And at first, even Adil later on asking questions about, like, how does that whole thing work? And basically, you take the best quality of these different people and it goes into the child making. And it's like all at once. And he's like, yeah, it's a very, one of the fathers responds like, oh, it's kind of a very delicate process, So each one of them, I mean, for a lot of people, this means so much. But no one's really thinking about Abigail's side of things, because Abigail's coming at this from an individual, but like the mentality of the witches isn't just individuality. Like, your actions reflect upon your family. You are your family. She's the only means of continuing the bloodline at this point in time, especially now that Charvel is gone. So it's like, you're literally the last hope. So, like, of course we want you to jump on. Like, that's how you fight this war too, by like continuing the bloodline, which makes sense. But at the same time, for Abigail, it's like my choices are being limited to me. Like, I need to be on the forefront. Like, how can I bring a child into a world where the spree run rampant, where the Camarilla are literally hunting us, like, in general, but also wiped out a ton of our family. Those we didn't know, those who didn't even know they were witches got hunted, Charvel, so everything, it's understandable where Abigail's coming from too. I kind of lean more towards her thought process of like, because it's like, that's all I am. I'm just a baby factory. That's all that kind of she feels like she's treated as. And obviously, like, who she cares about doesn't mean anything, because like, it's like, obviously the person she cares the most about is Adil, but it's like, right, her fathers are asking, like, but what will you bring to the occasion? It's like, what's so special about you? It's like, the sad thing is, it's like, we have to measure your qualities. Like, everyone has to be vetted for what they're capable of. And it's like, I mean, Adil's not the type to show off, but obviously he has a lot of capable abilities that, even, Abigail would know first and foremost, like, what he's capable of doing, but she's not letting them know because that's not important, and I think that's the same reason why Adil doesn't try to front. It's like, he cares about Abigail, but he never thought about being, like, latched to her in that regard of, like, making it, like, it can't just be a simple thing of love. It's got to be a prearranged thing. What makes it awkward is, even I love Grigori's there, and he's just like, don't you think this is a little awkward, having been engaged? He's like, on the other hand, but don't you think it's a little weird being engaged to her cousin? It's like, but then we'll have, then we can bond and share over memories of Charvel. He's like, is that weird? And he's like, yes, that's weird. It is weird. But I think that also speaks of just like what this is about. Like, oh, the fact is he's there as a potential candidate. It's like, well, I was a potential candidate for this family anyway because I was with Charvel, but that just puts me next in line. It's like, oh, like, but that's the thing. It feels so, once again, it feels so icky, because it's like, oh, like, let me slide down the conveyor belt. Like, that's what it feels so, like, there's nothing behind it. Like, there's no, like, oh, it's just kind of like, slide in the next default character type of thing of like, oh, like, it's weird. It really is. But But obviously, Petra, the moment she sees, like, wait, a deal's there, and she's like, is there anything we got to talk about? And then, like, the grandma comes in, kind of shuts down the conversation. What I thought was interesting, her grandma kind of looks at her and smiles, and it's just kind of like, even for Abigail, she's like, yeah, my grandma's, like, the toughest person, tougher than even, toughest woman I know, even tougher than Alder. So, but obviously we come to the conversation about, Abigail hasn't made a decision. She feels like there's more, but Petra is like pushing for this. It's like, you don't have any time. But her grandma kind of steps up, and I thought was interesting where she kind of puts Petra in her place, because it's like, right, after everything I've sacrificed, you were meant to be the one. You were supposed to put a bellwether at the top, answer to no one, and you answer to someone, don't you? So kind of, and now you see a little bit of where Petra gets, where she kind of puts Abigail down. It seems like that's probably kind of the bellwether way, sadly. But her grandma talks about, like, especially after everything with Charvel, and I think she had talked about, like, basically being buried near her and everything, and it's like, her perspective on a lot of things have changed, and it's like, she's telling Abigail to find her own place. She's like, looking at her, it's like, that fire in your eyes, find your own path. Don't do it because for me, Jim, or, like, your mom. Do it for you, find your own path. And I think for Petra, it's kind of annoying, because it's like, right, I kind of had to bend to the bellwether legacy, but Abigail gets the opportunity to be her own. But I think it's just like, it's kind of the thing of, like, the bellwethers have been stifled by that tradition for so long. That's what I think held Abigail back from the beginning, is that she thought she was better than everyone because of that bellwether name. But it's like, no, I'm not just a bellwether. I'm Abigail. Like, she's finding her own identity, whereas I feel like before she didn't really have that. So I think that's an interesting development on that front for her. Obviously, there's the whole situation with Scylla and Anacostia, like the difference of opinion when they find out, oh, Tiffany's parents were murdered. Who knows if Shane actually did that, because he was the one that delivered, so he probably did a lot of that handiwork himself, which is like, from a karma standpoint, it's like he got what he deserved. And even Scylla saying that later on, because I even thought that was interesting, because it's like the conversation of, like, Anacostia is like, let's take her to the military, which Scylla's like, no, let's not do that. At the very least, let's take her to the Dodgers. Like, don't even take her to the Spree. Don't take her to the army. Just let her stay with the Dodgers until she gets old enough that she can, make a decision for herself, just like I was. But for Anacostia, it's like, right, that foster program, it's like, it did good for me. And Scylla's like, yeah, then why are you here right now with me? But then Anacostia is like, you're not as bad as you make yourself out to be. You aren't the same person you were. And she's like, then why was I smiling when I killed Home Dude? And it was like, wait, you killed him? And it's like, yeah, like, after what he did to Tiffany's parents, like, and Tiffany, like, why wouldn't I? But Anacostia brings up, well, what about his daughter? Like, do you think, like, absence of her father? And that's the point. Like, that's the thing, too, of, like, the Spree never think about the ramifications, necessarily, of what, yes, you have this, in your mind, a righteous cause, but the ramifications of that. And I think that's so ironic that Scylla says, like, oh, like, I didn't, like, oh, I laughed. It's like, no, you aren't the same person. When you saw those people that were the ramification of what you did, the families that are the family and loved ones left behind after the mall situation at the beginning of season 1, you saw the ramifications of it, and the guilt ate you up. Like, you actually started feeling bad. You didn't believe in it, because once again, that was her first act. So maybe given enough time, like, even her belief in the cause to a certain extent has wavered. Whether it was actually falling in love with Rael, whether it was a conversation with Anacostia, a combination of the two. But she's definitely not the same person. She has to pretend like, I'm still that same person, but in actuality, you're not. Like, because you still felt guilty about it, because when you were telling, like, telling his wife, like, hey, don't hold on to hate, find something else to kind of focus on. Like, you felt guilty enough about it. Yes, you were driven there by your rage and everything, but even in the aftermath, you still felt a little guilty. But she knocks Anacostia out and takes Tiffany with her to Rael's mom. So I guess, like, she's gonna stay with them for a while until they can actually pass her on to a Dodger. Which obviously, Sarah's not too happy about that because it's kind of like, you failed. It's like, right, I need you to stay here. Now, it's a combination of, I think, for one, I think Sarah probably wants Anacostia near her because it's like, right, you've always kind of been that special person for me. So you're that child that was always held a special place in my heart. I mean, to be fair, living as long as she has, there probably have been many, but I think it's a situation of, I kind of want you out of danger because I do care about you, but it's also like, you belong by my side, you know, because you've always been my trusted ward, my trusted aide, essentially, when it comes to all of this. But for Anacostia, like, her mind is kind of shifted and changed, that she's not all about, like, before, she would have enjoyed that she was there without question, but a lot of the decisions that Sarah's made lately has made her question the foundation of everything that she's come to know. So her and Scylla are very similar in that regard. At the same time, there's Raelle and Tally in her hometown visiting her dad. It's like, right, let's not bring up any of that other stuff. But no matter where they go, you can't escape it, because there's even a sign that was saying, like, oh yeah, basically put Sarah to the gallows or something like that. And it's like, Raelle's like, yeah, even here, like, this town has never been too shy about saying how they really feel. But then it's the whole thing where Tally just feels like no matter where Sarah goes, she just causes more problems than good, you know? And it's so interesting because, like, Tally flip-flopped a lot, because, like, she was kind of all about, like, no, all about Sarah, and then kind of get Sarah in season 1, even becoming one of her biddies, and then you know, it's like, oh, I feel this deeper connection with you, and now that deeper connection has driven a wedge even deeper than before when it came to her belief in Sarah. She still believes in the system, and I think the army, but I think she just doesn't believe in Sarah's leadership. Just her as a leader, just as a person, all that she's done. Now, knowing the truth, as she learned it last episode of, right, that sacrifice, that, those martyrdoms weren't as martyrdom as they were more forced martyrdoms, you know? So that's kind of changed her perspective on a lot. You know, something that had actually crossed my mind, and I never really gave it much thought before, was like, Raelle's mom being a part of the spree is so interesting, because the spree kill regular people, which is so interesting because you had a child with a civilian. And I think that's going to be a conversation Raelle is eventually going to have with her mom too, because it's like, yes, she has her issues with the army and Sarah, but she would never side with the spree either, because of the spree murders so many people on such a large scale. But also to know your mom's a part of all of that, especially considering, like, wait, you're murdering regular people. Dad's a regular person. Like, so if the time came, would you murder Dad too? And I think the question would be yes, just because she believes in what they do that much, which that's a whole conversation, because obviously, like, Raelle and Tally also went to see, like, Quinn, who was, like, her mom's best friend. They kind of were in the trenches together a lot. And obviously there's a conversation, like, obviously we're inching closer to that realization on Raelle's part, but it's like, yeah, you know, Tally brought up, like, yeah, she called for her mom and didn't show up, but, like, Quinn was like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, there's no, like, denying that. Like, when the spirits call, like, they have to come. So Raelle probably doesn't know what much to think about that. And now we kind of understand a little bit more of why she feels the way she does, because she opens up to her dad. Like, the fact is that before her mom was deployed again, before, like, that was the last time they got to see her, Raelle and her got into an argument because her mom was sneaking out, and, like, it's like, well, you're sneaking out, like, midnight. And when Raelle confronted her about it, she denied it, and she was just saying these awful things, and even said, like, if you're going to lie to me, that means you don't love me, which, once again, I think that's going to be a powerful statement that's going to come back around when it's like, wait, you don't love me, because the fact is, all that you put me and Dad through, we mourned you, we thought you were dead, and you've been alive this entire time. Once again, not only have you been alive, you've been leading a terrorist group, the spree, you know. So it's kind of like, it's going to be one whammy after another when the time finally comes. It's not going to be the grand reunion. I think Raelle's mom was hoping that she could get to Raelle before, and like, probably try to ease her into this. It's like, nah, it's all going to happen all at once, and it's not going to be the happy reunion you at very least hoped for. But it's like, how would you expect it to turn out when your daughter finds out you've been alive and you've been lying to her this entire time? So that statement in particular of like, if you lying to me, that means you don't love me. It's going to come back to that. But I'm sure for her, it's like, I've done everything I've done, not only for you, but other witches as well. The Spree's mantra, kind of why they're doing what they do. Like, it's all for all witches. So I'm sure that's going to be a part of that conversation. But also during that conversation, Tally's now pieced it together about Nicta being the one who started the spree. Because like Quinn had referenced like mines, in particular ones in bottles, and it's like it was push spells, and she's like, wait, what? And it's like, yeah. And then Tally starts doing the math of like, yeah, that would have been after this point in time. So it's like, wait, Nicta, I think she's the one. So now's the conversation of, so no wonder Sarah's removed her from, it's easy to hide your mistakes. When your trusted friend, allies, a sister, turned into what is essentially not only yours, but more so your mortal enemy. Like, because the spree aren't against all witches, they're specifically against Sarah and what she symbolizes, and the witches that kind of back her to a certain extent in what she believes. So there's that. But they bring up the interesting point of, because of Sarah, they're fighting so many wars on so many fronts. Like the Camarilla are just getting stronger because so many people are just backing it, but also the Camarilla had the means and opportunities that they have. But now also like we're dealing with the spree too, all byproducts of her, because the Camarilla are connected to her. Like, she claimed to have wiped out that enemy, which she still has told none of them like the truth behind that. We still don't know what that history really is. And now also like we find out you're the reason why the spree exists. Like, you're the one that kind of pushed Nicta to go down that route. So kind of interesting developments on that front. Another element to this episode is I like the Nicta reveal, like the lady that's keeping her head covered, and the moment Tally makes that connection, then they reveal, like, the moment it's like, Tally's like, oh, I think she's the leader of, I was like, oh, that's to the person covering their face. It didn't even cross my mind to think that it was Nicta. But also, it's like, it's so interesting too, because they keep the cell element to it. Like, they've always made it seem like the spree don't have like a top dog that they answer to. It always seemed like there's respective cells that don't. I mean, I think you can still have a leader and still have cells that don't necessarily communicate, but still. Obviously, we learn a little bit more. Like, I'm going to connect these points together, like everything with Nicta, as well as like what she's up to, as well as Anacostia. I'm curious, like, was she just looking at like anything, like just kind of like, how was she viewing Sarah and them? Like, part of me was like, did she infiltrate one of her biddies' eyes or something like that? I think so. Maybe. I don't know. Because it looked like it was from a person's perspective and not just like... I mean, maybe it's a similar thing to what Anacostia was using to follow Scylla. But other than that, we learn more about this particular, like, the weaponized thing that they do. Like, Isadora, like, bleeds a little bit and releases that thing, and it goes after her blood. And it's like this thing, just the moment, it's like almost like a bloodhound. It gets a trace of you, it's going to devour you in minutes, and it won't stop until you're gone. And it's like this thing has no limits, so as long as there are people around for it to eat and feed on, that will constantly sustain it. So this thing, like, if it gets around enough witches, it can bounce. That's why it did what it did on a train. Like, this thing is self-sustaining in that it didn't disappear until after it had wiped out the entire train. So it's like, how they managed to make a weapon like this. To be fair, they've had 200 years or so to kind of craft the ultimate weapon against them. This almost borderline sentient weapon of theirs. But I wonder how... God, I'm blanking on it. What is it? The thing that gave Raelle, like, the boost that she's got, was it the My Seat? I wonder how would that react to that weapon. Like, I mean, it might be the only means of it, because currently Isadora is like, the only way to fight that thing is to burn it. ironically, is Nicta does what she does, and I was like pouring, like the moment start pouring that like molten, like everything being melted down that dude's throat. I was like, oh, I was like, what are you about to do with that? And it's like, oh, they're destroying Sarah's throat. Like it's meant to like not only, I think it wasn't just to kill her. I'm like, she probably knew like with the biddies and everything she'd survive, but it was meant to make up like destroy her, cause so much damage that to kind of take away her voice, because I guess it's like her songs and her voice have been used for such evil in the past. So it's like, once again, it's like you're the symbol of the way things have been, and it's like I'm trying to crush that. Which I'm kind of like, is this really the time to be getting your personal revenge, Nicta? I think that speaks volumes of how much of a grudge Nicta holds against her, where it's like, she's willing to go this far, even with an enemy like the Camarilla at the front door. She's still willing to take time out of her schedule to make sure you're in pain and you suffer, because it's like a sympathy spell. And it's so interesting because Anacostia, her mind had changed at least somewhat when it came to the spree, at least when it came to like Scylla. So now this is like, right, I think this is going to just fortify her need to stay by Sarah's side. But I mean, to be fair, like, we've seen a little bit of what Sarah's done, so who knows what else Sarah's done that she's kind of hidden away. But also, like, Nicta and her people, the spree, are kind of, like, demonized, especially by Sarah. I mean, granted, the greater public demonizes them, rightfully so, in my opinion, but, once again, they're a group that believes so wholeheartedly in what they do that they're not supposed to feel any remorse for what they do, but I don't know. I think I find that so fascinating that she just would do that now of all times, because it didn't just stop with Sarah. Like, it hit all of her. It was a sympathy thing of like it hit all of her biddies, and it's like if it wasn't for her biddies, she'd be dead 3 times over. So that's why I'm like, I wanted to Nicta not account for that, or did she do that and was thinking like, well, even if you survive, you're going to be out of commission for a while. Like maybe like Sarah knows that it's Nicta behind it. Who knows? Obviously, Rael's mom and Scylla go to try and find the kids who were locked up in cages behind a vet clinic, and the moment they went in there, the kids were already gone, had already moved them, and it's like, wow, they look at us as less than human. And Rael's mom corrects her, being like, no, more. That's why they fear us, because essentially, it's kind of a very similar X-Men conversation, like, because we're different, but also we're the next line in the human evolution. Like, we're human plus. We're better than them. That's why they fear us. They're scared of us, But then we find out their main target is Rael, and so they end up knocking all the witches out, but making sure to grab Rael, which I think is so interesting, because it's like, how did they? Someone has to be high up in the food chain to know about Rael, because we know the vice president was there, but I don't think he'd do that, considering his daughter is very publicly a witch. Not less. I mean, we haven't seen Penelope for a while, so not less it's a thing of he's all about this, and it's like, if I have to make a sacrifice, even if it's my own daughter. We don't know. Maybe he's about that life, and it's all about self-sacrifice in many different regards. As I brought up with the whole spree situation, as we've seen with this whole thing of like, it's like, oh, well, what was it, episode 3, the whole not wanting to have a Tiffany. It's like, right. What if we? I don't know what I'd do if we found out our daughter was a Tiffany. So I don't know. But it's just like, who would know about Rael specifically? Because she was highest priority, because they know about how powerful she is. Granted, that power is going to protect her from them probably trying to rip out her vocal cords, but if they can probably sedate her enough, but that power is kind of out of her control. Like, even without her being active, it still acts on its own, but she does need to be conscious and fully, like, I think, lucid and aware enough for, like, because her consciousness is what kind of triggers it. So even though it happens subconsciously, she needs to be aware enough for that, because that's why it didn't activate while they were carrying her away. Maybe it's because those two have melded a lot more. Like, before, it just kind of acted on its own, but now that they've kind of melded more, that's not that's not a possibility of it kind of running wild anymore, because it is more under her control now. But you still have to go back to the fact of, like, right, they were able to wipe out most of the Bellwether family line. Granted, we don't know what other witches, but it seems so targeted because it was all around the same time. So it's like they knew about the Bellwether. So whatever their intelligence system is, that for them to know about Raelle, I just feel like they have to have someone on the inside to let them know. But them tracking down the Bellwethers who didn't even know they were witches, that the Bellwethers weren't even aware of, I guess that should be enough sign to show, like, what they're capable of. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and see where everything ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. I think this is going to be the event that leads everything, because now it's like Scylla and Raelle's mom know, like, wait, they're targeting her. The moment they find out that she's been taken, they're going to go into action. But there's also the thing of, right, the army's going to go into action too, because their ultimate weapon just got taken by the ultimate enemy. So, once again, Nick to kind of pick the worst time to kind of take Sarah out of commission, but we'll ultimately have to wait and see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.